The wind didn't howl in Montana territory. It screamed. Alara Vance had learned that distinction during her first winter out here, back when Thomas was still alive, and the cabin felt like an adventure instead of a tomb. Now, 3 winters later and 6 months a widow, she understood that the frontier didn't care about your dreams or your dead. It just kept pushing, kept taking, kept testing how much a person could lose before they finally broke. She stood at the window, one hand pressed against glass so cold it burned, watching snow devils dance across the meadow where nothing grew anymore. Behind her, the fire in the stone hearth crackled, too loud in the silence, eating through wood they couldn't afford to waste. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it felt enormous with Thomas gone. Empty spaces where his voice should be, his laugh, his hands fixing things that broke. "Mama?" Caleb's voice, small and uncertain. He was 8 years old and trying so hard to be the man Thomas would have wanted. It was breaking her heart in slow motion. "I'm here, baby." She didn't turn around. If he saw her face right now, he'd know. Children always knew. Jonah's cough is worse. That made her turn. Caleb stood in the doorway to the bedroom, his dark hair sticking up, his father's eyes too serious for a child. She could hear it now that she was listening, the wet, rattling cough coming from the loft where Jonah slept. "Did you give him the tea I made? He won't drink it, says it tastes like dirt." "It does taste like dirt." She managed something close to a smile. "But it's the only thing we've got." She moved past Caleb, her boots heavy on the floorboards Thomas had laid himself, and climbed the ladder to the loft. Jonah was curled under every blanket they owned, shivering despite the fire below. His face was flushed, his breathing shallow. 8 years old and identical to his brother in every way except temperament. Where Caleb worried, Jonah fought. Right now he was losing. "Hey, troublemaker." She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, pressed her hand to his forehead. "Hot. Too hot. How about you prove Caleb wrong and drink that tea?" "Can't." His voice was barely a whisper. "Hurts." "I know it hurts, but you're tougher than this, remember? You're the one who caught that rabbit last month with your bare hands." "That rabbit was stupid." "Maybe, but you were fast." She brushed his hair back, felt the fever radiating off him. They were almost out of willow bark. Almost out of everything. The nearest town was 15 miles through snow that would kill you before you made it halfway. "I need you to try, Jonah. For me." He looked at her with eyes that were too old, too knowing. "Are we going to die out here?" The question hung in the cold air between them. She could lie. She was his mother. Lying was part of the job description when the truth was too heavy for small shoulders. "No," she said. "We're not going to die. We're Vances. We're tougher than this winter, tougher than this land, tougher than anything that comes at us. Your daddy proved that, and now we're proving it too." She didn't know if she believed it anymore. But she said it anyway, because that's what you did when you had 2 sons depending on you and nothing else left. Jonah drank the tea. Gagged, cursed with words he'd learned from Thomas, but he drank it. She stayed until his breathing evened out, until the shivering subsided, then climbed back down to find Caleb standing exactly where she'd left him. "He's going to be okay," she said, though neither of them believed it. "We're running out of food. I know. And wood. I know. Mama, I know, Caleb." She heard the edge in her voice, hated herself for it. "I know we're running out of everything. I know this is bad, but I don't have any answers right now, so I need you to just be a kid for a minute. Can you do that?" He looked at her, and she saw Thomas in his face, that stubborn set to his jaw, that refusal to pretend things were fine when they weren't. "I haven't been a kid since Daddy died," he said quietly, and walked away. She stood there in the middle of the cabin, surrounded by the life Thomas had built, and she was failing to maintain and let herself feel it, all of it. The fear, the exhaustion, the crushing weight of knowing she was watching everything fall apart and couldn't stop it. She'd been holding it together for 6 months, playing the role of the strong widow, the capable mother, the woman who could handle anything the frontier threw at her. She was so tired of lying. The storm hit 2 hours before dark. She'd seen it building all afternoon, clouds massing on the horizon like an army assembling for attack. This far into winter, storms didn't just blow through. They settled in, dug deep, stayed for days. She'd brought in what little firewood remained, checked the shutters twice, made sure the boys had eaten something. Not enough, never enough, but something. Now the wind was testing the cabin, probing for weaknesses. Snow came horizontal across the meadow, erasing the world beyond the windows. The temperature dropped so fast she could feel it through the walls, seeping in through gaps Thomas had meant to fix before winter, before the accident. Don't think about the accident. But that was impossible out here, where everything reminded her. The axe by the door that had slipped in his hands. The south pasture where the horse had spooked. The tree that had fallen the wrong way, too fast for Thomas to move, heavy enough to crush a man's chest and steal his last breath while she ran through snow screaming his name. She fed the fire, watched it devour wood that should have lasted another week. Caleb sat at the table working on his letters, forming them carefully in the book Thomas had brought from town. Jonah was asleep again, or unconscious. She wasn't sure anymore. The wind shrieked around the eaves, and she thought about her parents back in Boston, their faces when she'd told them she was marrying a homesteader and moving to Montana Territory. Her mother had cried. Her father had said she was making a mistake. They'd been right. The knock came just after midnight. She jerked awake, disoriented, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that leaned against the wall beside her chair. Caleb was asleep at the table, his head pillowed on his arms. The fire had burned low. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody came to isolated cabins in the dead of winter at midnight. Every story she'd heard about the frontier, every warning, every whispered tale in town about what happened to women alone, it all crashed through her mind in the space between heartbeats. She grabbed the rifle, checked that it was loaded, moved to the door. "Who's there?" "Somebody who's going to freeze to death if you don't open this door." A man's voice, rough and strained. "Please, I don't know you." "No, ma'am, you don't. But if I'm not inside in about 2 minutes, you won't ever get the chance. This storm's trying to kill me, and it's doing a fine job." She looked back at Caleb, still sleeping. Thought about Jonah upstairs, helpless. This could be a trick. Could be bandits using the storm as cover. Could be any number of things that ended with her and her boys dead. Could also be a man dying in the snow. She made a choice. Probably the wrong one. Probably the choice that would get them all killed. But Thomas had never turned anyone away from their door, and she couldn't start now. She opened it. The man fell more than walked inside, bringing a wall of snow and wind with him. She slammed the door behind him, threw the bolt, and turned to face what she'd just let into her home. He was big, not tall exactly, but broad through the shoulders, built like someone who'd spent his life doing hard work. His coat was crusted with ice, his beard white with frost. He collapsed against the door, breathing hard, and she kept the rifle pointed at his chest. "Don't move." He raised his hand slowly, carefully. "Wasn't planning on it. Can't feel my legs." "What are you doing out in this?" "Dying, mostly." He managed a grim smile. "Was heading to Chester Flats when the storm hit. Thought I could make it. Was wrong." Caleb stirred at the table, lifted his head. His eyes went wide when he saw the stranger. "Mama?" "It's okay. Stay where you are." She didn't lower the rifle. "You have weapons?" "Pistol. Inside pocket. But my hands don't work right now, so I'm not much of a threat." He was shaking. The kind of violent trembling that came before hypothermia shut everything down. "Look, I understand the situation here. Woman alone with a child, stranger at the door. You don't trust me, shouldn't trust me, but I swear on whatever you want me to swear on, I mean you no harm. Just need to get warm, and then I'll be gone." She studied him. His eyes were gray, direct, with the kind of clarity that came from seeing too much. Soldier's eyes, tracker's eyes, eyes that assessed and calculated and missed nothing. But there was something else there too, exhaustion that went deeper than the storm, older than tonight. "The rifle stays in my hands. Wouldn't expect different. You try anything, I will shoot you. I'm a good shot." "I believe you." She did lower the rifle then, but kept it close. "Caleb, help him to the fire." Caleb moved quickly, surprisingly unafraid. Together they got the stranger to the hearth, got his frozen coat off. His hands were white, bloodless. She grabbed blankets, wrapped them around him, then went to heat water. You had to warm people slowly. Thomas had taught her that. Too fast, and you could kill them. "What's your name?" she asked, measuring coffee grounds. Real coffee, precious and rare. But what was the point of saving it if people died at your door? Ronan, hail. I'm Alara. This is Caleb. My other son, Jonah, is upstairs. Pleased to meet you. Sorry about the circumstances. She brought him coffee, watched him wrap his damaged hands around the cup. He drank like a man who hadn't seen anything hot in days. You're a long way from anywhere, Mrs. Vance. It's just Vance. And yes, we are. He caught the correction, the meaning behind it. Didn't comment. How long's the nearest help? 15 miles to town. Might as well be 100 in this weather. You planning to wait it out? Don't have much choice. He looked around the cabin then, really looked. She saw him taking inventory, the way she imagined he'd been trained to assess situations. Not enough firewood, not enough food. Children too thin, mother too exhausted, cabin too isolated. The math wasn't good. How long you been out here alone? He asked quietly. 6 months. That's a long time. Not long enough. Winter's just getting started. Caleb had retreated to the table, watching them both. Ronan met the boy's eyes, gave him a small nod. Caleb nodded back, some understanding passing between them that Alara didn't quite catch. Thank you, Ronan said, for opening the door. Most people wouldn't have. Most people aren't stupid enough to homestead in Montana territory. There's different kinds of stupid. This kind takes courage. She laughed, sharp and bitter. Courage. That's one word for it. The storm settled in for the night, wind hammering the cabin like it was trying to tear it off its foundation. Ronan fell asleep by the fire, the kind of deep, surrendering sleep that came after survival. Alara stayed awake, rifle across her lap, watching him. Trust was expensive out here. She'd let him in because her husband would have, because it was the right thing to do. She hoped she wouldn't regret it. Caleb finally spoke from the table, his voice small. Is he going to hurt us? I don't think so. But you're not sure. I'm not sure about anything anymore, baby. That's just the truth. He nodded, accepting it the way he'd learned to accept everything else. Then he asked the question that had been hanging between them for months. Are we going to leave? The cabin? She looked around at the home Thomas had built with his bare hands, the dream they'd shared and she'd inherited. Leaving felt like betrayal. Staying felt like suicide. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe. Daddy wouldn't want us to leave. Daddy's not here. The words came out harsher than she meant. And maybe if he were, we wouldn't be in this mess. She regretted it immediately, saw Caleb's face crumple. But she was too tired to take it back, too exhausted to be the perfect grieving widow who never spoke ill of the dead. Go to bed, she said. It's late. He went without argument, disappearing into the shadows. She heard him climb the ladder to the loft, heard him whisper something to Jonah, then silence, except for the wind and the crackling fire and her own breathing. Ronan stirred in his sleep, muttered something she couldn't make out. His hands were bandaged now. She'd wrapped them once the color started coming back, worried about frostbite. He'd been lucky. A few more minutes in that storm and he'd be dead. She wondered what that said about luck, that surviving meant freezing to death took slightly longer. Dawn came gray and angry, the storm still raging. Ronan woke slowly, carefully, like a man used to assessing his surroundings before moving. He saw her first, still in the chair, rifle still in her lap. You didn't sleep. Didn't seem wise. He nodded, understanding. Fair enough. Can I move without getting shot? Slowly. He stood, testing his legs, walked to the window and looked out at the whiteout conditions. This is bad. It'll blow through in a few days. And then what? Then we all starve more slowly. He turned to look at her. How long's your food going to last? That's not your concern. Maybe not. But I'm stuck here until this storm breaks, and I'd rather not watch a woman and 2 boys die of hunger while I'm waiting. We're managing. No, you're not. He said it flatly, without judgment. I've seen enough desperate situations to recognize one. You're at the end of your rope and you know it. What do you want me to say? That you're right? That I failed? That I can't do this? She stood up, anger finally breaking through the exhaustion. Fine. You're right. I can't do this. My husband built this place and then he died and left me to figure out how to survive in hell. And I'm failing. Is that what you wanted to hear? No. His voice was quiet. I wanted to hear whether you're willing to accept help. That stopped her. What? I was a soldier, did supply management for the army. I know how to make things last, how to stretch provisions, and I'm a decent hunter when the weather breaks. He paused. I could help, if you'd let me. Why would you do that? Because you opened your door when you didn't have to. Because those boys deserve better than what they're getting. And because, he looked out at the storm again, because I've got nowhere else to be. She wanted to say no, wanted to send him away as soon as the storm broke, maintain whatever illusion of independence she had left. But Caleb's question from last night echoed in her mind. Are we going to leave? If she said yes to this stranger, maybe they wouldn't have to. All right, she said. When the storm breaks, you can stay until spring. Help with the hunting, with the wood. But this is still my home, and my boys, and if I tell you to leave, I'll leave. No argument. They shook on it, her hand small in his damaged one, sealing an agreement neither of them was sure they'd survive. Upstairs, Jonas started coughing again. The sound rattled through the cabin, wet and desperate. Ronan's eyes tracked to the loft. Your boy sick? He'll be fine. That doesn't sound fine. I said he'll be fine. She heard the desperation in her voice, couldn't hide it. He has to be fine. Ronan nodded slowly. Didn't push, but she saw it in his face, the calculation, the assessment, adding up all the ways this situation was worse than she was admitting. The storm blew for 3 more days. They fell into an uneasy routine. Ronan stayed by the fire, recovering from his brush with death. Alara maintained her distance, kept the rifle close. Caleb watched them both with wary eyes, caught between relief that someone else was here and fear about what that meant. Jonah drifted in and out of fever, his cough never quite improving, never quite getting worse. They barely spoke. What was there to say? They were strangers trapped together by circumstance, each carrying their own weight, their own demons. But sometimes in the silence, Alara caught Ronan looking at her, not with judgment or pity, but with recognition. Like he knew exactly what it felt like to be hanging on by your fingernails, one bad day away from letting go. On the 4th morning, the wind died. She woke to silence. Real silence, not just the absence of noise. The storm had passed. Weak sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating a world buried under snow that reached halfway up the cabin walls. Ronan was already awake, standing at the window. It's over. Until the next one. You always this optimistic? You haven't lived here long enough to be pessimistic. He smiled at that. Small, genuine. Fair point. They dug out together, carving a path from the door to the woodshed, to the barn where Thomas's old horse still somehow survived. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, every exhale a white cloud, every inhale like knives in her lungs. But the work felt good, felt purposeful. For the first time in months, she wasn't doing this alone. Caleb came out to help, bundled in every piece of clothing he owned. He and Ronan worked together without speaking, some unspoken communication flowing between them. She watched her son smile, actually smile, for the first time since Thomas died, and something in her chest loosened just slightly. Maybe this would work. Maybe they'd survive. Then she saw them, 5 riders, dark shapes against the white landscape, sitting their horses on the ridge that overlooked the homestead. Too far away to make out details, but close enough to recognize intent. They weren't moving, weren't approaching, just watching. Her blood turned colder than the air. Ronan. He followed her gaze, his body going still in that way soldiers did when violence was near. How long have they been there? I don't know, I just saw them. They friends of yours? I don't have friends who travel in groups of 5. He studied the riders for a long moment, and she saw his expression change, saw the tactical assessment taking over, the threat evaluation. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder. Get Caleb inside, right now. What? Now, Alara. She grabbed Caleb, practically dragged him toward the cabin. Behind her, she heard Ronan's voice, low and urgent. Whatever they want, whatever they say, don't trust them. Not for a second. She got Caleb through the door, slammed it shut. Her heart was hammering now, fear rushing in to fill the space where hope had briefly lived. Through the window, she watched the riders. Still not moving, still just watching. Mama? Caleb's voice was small. Who are they? I don't know, baby. But that was a lie. She knew exactly who they were, what they wanted. She'd been pretending for months that this wouldn't happen, that the rumors from town were just rumors, that her isolation would protect her. She'd been wrong. The riders stayed on the ridge until sunset, then disappeared into the gathering dark. But Alara knew they'd be back. Men like that always came back. That night, while Caleb and Jonah slept, she told Ronan everything. About the land disputes in the valley, about the rumors of claims being jumped, homesteaders being forced out, about the men, led by someone named Crow, who were slowly taking control of every piece of valuable territory, using fear and violence to build their own kingdom in the lawless frontier. About Thomas and the accident that killed him. He wouldn't sell, she said quietly, staring into the fire. Someone came, made him an offer for the land. Good offer. Thomas said no. 2 weeks later, he was dead. You think they killed him? I know they killed him. I just can't prove it. Ronan was silent for a long time. Then, why didn't you leave? Where would I go? Back to Boston, where my family can say, I told you so. To town, where I'd be just another widow begging for work? This land is all I have left of Thomas. All my boys have left of their father. She looked at him. I stayed because leaving felt like letting them win. Pride's an expensive thing out here. So I'm learning. He stood, moved to the window. The riders were gone, but their presence lingered like smoke. Those men on the ridge. They weren't just passing through. No. They were counting, seeing how many people were here, what kind of defenses you have, figuring out whether you're worth the trouble. And tomorrow, they're going to come down here and find out. Fear spiked through her, sharp and cold. What do I do? He turned to look at her, and she saw something in his face that scared her almost as much as the riders. Determination, calculation, and the kind of cold competence that came from experience with violence. You make a choice, he said. Run or fight. Those are my only options? Only ones that keep you breathing. She thought about Thomas, about the dream he'd had for this place. Thought about Caleb and Jonah, about the life she wanted to give them versus the life she was actually providing. Thought about Boston, about safety, about survival. Then she thought about the look in those riders' eyes as they sat on the ridge, counting her like she was already dead. I'm tired of running, she said. I've been running since Thomas died. From grief, from responsibility, from the truth. If I run now, I'll never stop. Then we fight. We? I told you, I've got nowhere else to be. And I've seen what men like Crow do. Seen too much of it. His jaw tightened. So yeah, we. She should have sent him away. Should have protected him from the violence that was coming, from the choice she was making. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of pretending she could handle this by herself. Okay, she said. Tell me what we need to do. They spent the rest of the night preparing for war. Ronan moved through the cabin like he was mapping a battlefield, which Alara supposed he was. He tested every shutter, checked every corner, ran his hands along the walls looking for weaknesses. She watched him work, coffee growing cold in her hands, wondering what kind of man knew how to prepare for a siege. The north wall, he said, not looking at her. It's the weakest point. Wood's rotted through in 2 places. They'll see that. Thomas was going to fix it. Thomas isn't here. He said it without cruelty, just fact. We need to reinforce it. You have extra lumber? Some, in the barn. We'll use it, and we need to think about sight lines, firing positions. He paused at the window, looking out at the pre-dawn darkness. How good are you with that rifle? Really? She set down the coffee. Thomas taught me to shoot when we first came out here, rabbits mostly. Shot a wolf once that got into the chicken coop. That's not what I'm asking. She knew what he was asking. Could she shoot a man? Could she aim at another human being and pull the trigger, watch them fall, live with that afterward? The question she'd been avoiding since the riders appeared on the ridge. I don't know, she said honestly. You're going to need to know soon. Have you? The question came out before she could stop it. Shot a man? He was quiet for a long moment, still staring out the window. Yes. How many? Enough that I stopped counting. He turned to face her then, and his eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. War does that, makes killing into arithmetic. You stop seeing people and start seeing targets, threats, problems that need solving. It's efficient. It's also how you lose pieces of yourself you don't get back. Is that what happened to you? That's a long conversation for a short night. He moved away from the window. We need to wake the boys. Get them somewhere safe. Safe where? We're 15 miles from anywhere. There's a root cellar, right? Under the kitchen? She nodded. Thomas had dug it their first year, deep enough to store vegetables through winter, cool enough to keep meat from spoiling, big enough for 2 small boys to hide in. We'll put them down there, food, water, blankets. If things go bad, don't. She held up a hand. Don't finish that sentence. Alara, I know what you're going to say. If things go bad, they stay hidden. If we die, they wait until it's safe, and then they run. I know. Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. But I'm not ready to have that conversation with my children. Not yet. You might not get a choice about when you're ready. She knew he was right, hated that he was right. How long do we have? Hard to say. If it were me planning this, I'd wait until morning. Come in when you're having breakfast, when your guard's down. But Crow might not be that patient. He glanced at the rifle leaning against the wall. You have more weapons? Thomas's pistol. It's old, but it works. Ammunition? Maybe 30 rounds for the rifle, 10 for the pistol. That's not much for a fight. Then we'll have to make them count. They worked in silence after that, moving through the cabin in the strange intimacy of shared purpose. Ronan dragged lumber from the barn, reinforced the north wall while she prepared the root cellar. Blankets, food, water. The lantern Thomas had bought in town last spring, his pocket watch, so the boys would have something of his if the worst happened. She was tucking the watch into Jonah's blanket when Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mama, what are you doing? She straightened, tried to find words that wouldn't terrify him, failed. Come here, baby. He crossed to her and she knelt down so they were eye level. In the lamplight, he looked so much like Thomas it hurt. Same dark hair, same serious expression, same way of holding himself like he was carrying weight too heavy for his frame. Those men we saw yesterday, she said carefully, they might come back. Are they bad men? I think so, yes. Are they going to hurt us? The honest answer, probably yes, would break something in him. The comforting lie would be worse when the truth arrived. She settled for somewhere in between. Mr. Ronan and I are going to make sure that doesn't happen. But just in case, I need you and Jonah to do something for me. Can you be very brave? He nodded, trying to be the man he thought he should be. 8 years old and already learning that childhood ended when violence came calling. She showed him the root cellar, explained the plan. If shooting started, he was to grab his brother and climb down into the darkness. Close the hatch. Stay quiet no matter what he heard. Wait until either she or Ronan came to get them. What if neither of you comes? His voice was small, frightened in a way he was trying to hide. Then you wait until it's quiet, until you're sure they're gone. Then you take Jonah and you run to town. Find Sheriff Morrison. Tell him everything. I don't want to leave you. I know, baby. But if it comes to that, I need you to take care of your brother. Can you do that? He nodded again, but she saw the tears he was fighting, saw the way his hands trembled. She pulled him close, held him tight, tried to press all her love and fear and desperate hope into that embrace. Your daddy would be so proud of you, she whispered. You know that, right? So proud of how strong you've been. I miss him. Me too, every single day. They stayed like that until Jonah's coughing echoed down from the loft, pulling them back to the present. Caleb wiped his eyes, straightened his shoulders, trying to be brave, breaking her heart in the process. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that would have been beautiful if they weren't preparing for violence. Ronan had finished the reinforcements, created firing positions at 2 windows that gave them overlapping fields of view. He'd moved furniture, stacked what little they had to create cover. The cabin didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a fort. Alara got the boys dressed, fed them the last of the bacon. Jonah was better this morning, fever down, cough less persistent. Small mercies. She watched him eat, watched Caleb push food around his plate, and tried to memorize this moment, just in case. They look like you, Ronan said quietly. He was at the window keeping watch. Both of them. But they've got their father's eyes. How do you know what their father's eyes looked like? I don't. But I can see his mark on this place. The way the cabin's built, the attention to detail. Man who does work like that, he sees things clearly. His sons would inherit that. She hadn't expected poetry from a man preparing for war. You're full of surprises. I'm full of something. Not sure it's surprises. He tensed suddenly, his whole body going still. We've got movement. Her heart kicked into a higher gear. Where? Ridge, same spot as yesterday. He squinted into the distance. 5 riders. Staying put for now. She moved to the other window, rifle in hand. She could just make them out, dark shapes against the snow, perfectly positioned to watch the cabin. Not approaching, not yet. Just letting them know they were there. The waiting was worse than any action could be. An hour passed. 2. The riders didn't move, didn't leave. Just sat there like patient predators, letting fear do their work for them. What are they waiting for? She asked. Us to make a mistake, show weakness. Maybe they're hoping we'll panic, try to run. Ronan hadn't moved from his position. It's a test. They want to see what we're made of. So what do? We don't give them what they want. We wait them out, show them we're not scared. But we are scared. They don't need to know that. Caleb had taken Jonah to the loft, keeping him distracted with the letter book. She could hear them up there, Caleb's patient voice coaching his brother through words. That ordinary sound against the extraordinary tension nearly broke her. Another hour. The sun climbed higher, melting snow on the roof, sending water dripping past the windows. Still the riders waited. Then they moved. Not all at once. One broke from the group, started down the ridge toward the cabin. Slow, deliberate, making himself visible. The others stayed behind, watching. Here we go, Ronan said softly. Remember what we talked about. Let me do the talking. You just keep that rifle ready and don't point it at anyone unless I tell you to. What if? No what ifs. We stick to the plan. The rider approached at a walk, hands visible and empty. As he got closer, Alara could make out details. Older than she'd expected, maybe 45 or 50. Well-dressed for the frontier, coat that looked expensive, boots that hadn't seen much hard use. His horse was good stock, well-fed. Everything about him screamed money and power. He stopped 20 yards from the cabin, close enough to talk, far enough to stay safe. Morning, he called out. Pleasant voice, almost friendly. Sorry to disturb you folks. Name's Garrett. I work for Mr. Crow. He owns the land office in Chester Flats. Ronan opened the door just enough to be heard. That's real interesting, but this land's already claimed. Oh, I know that. Belonged to Thomas Vance, if I'm not mistaken. Fine man. Tragedy what happened to him. Garrett's expression was sympathetic, practiced. I'm actually here to speak with Mrs. Vance. Is she available? I'm here. Alara stepped into the doorway, keeping Ronan between her and Garrett. Say what you came to say? Mrs. Vance, please accept my condolences on your loss. I know this must be a difficult time. He smiled, all warmth and concern. Which is why Mr. Crow sent me. He'd like to make you an offer on your property. Very generous offer. Enough to set you up comfortably in town, give your boys a proper education. Better life than what you've got out here, struggling to survive. The land's not for sale. I understand your attachment. Really, I do. But let's be practical. You're a widow with 2 young children, middle of winter, miles from help. This place is going to kill you if you stay. Mr. Crow's offering you a way out. I said no. Garrett's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Mrs. Vance, I don't think you understand the situation you're in. This land, all the land in this valley, it's being developed, organized. Mr. Crow has plans, big plans. Progress is coming whether you want it or not. You can either be part of that, profit from it, or... He let the sentence hang. Or what? Ronan's voice was flat, dangerous. Or you can find yourself on the wrong side of progress, which would be a shame. Especially with those boys to think about. Garrett shifted in his saddle, still maintaining that pleasant expression. Mr. Crow's a patient man, but his patience isn't infinite. He's giving you a choice here. That's more than some folks get. Tell Crow he can take his offer and... We'll think about it, Ronan interrupted, shooting Alara a warning look. Give us a few days. Garrett brightened. Now that's sensible. I can give you until the end of the week. After that, well, Mr. Crow might decide to pursue other options. He tipped his hat. You folks have a blessed day. Think hard about this. It's a good offer, best you're likely to get. He turned his horse and rode back up the ridge, rejoining the other riders. They sat there for another minute, making sure their presence was felt, then disappeared over the crest. Elora rounded on Ronan. Why did you tell him we'd think about it? Because telling him to go to hell would have started the fight right here, right now. We're not ready for that. We're never going to be ready. Maybe not, but we can be more ready than we are. He closed the door, threw the bolt. They'll be back. Probably tomorrow, expecting an answer. That gives us time. Time for what? To prepare. To get the boys somewhere safer. Maybe to figure out if there's any law in this territory that gives a damn. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him that this was her land, her decision, but he was right and she knew it. Bravado wouldn't save them. Strategy might. What did you mean about getting the boys somewhere safer? There's a homestead about 8 miles north, the Carlsons. You know them? She nodded. Eric and Margaret Carlson, older couple who'd been out here longer than anyone. They'd come to Thomas's funeral, brought food, offered help she'd been too proud to accept. If we can get the boys there before Crow comes back, they're out of the line of fire. Carlsons won't turn them away. 8 miles through snow, with Jonah still sick. Better than keeping them here when the shooting starts. He was right again. She hated that he kept being right. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. Ronan fashioned a sled from lumber, something they could use to pull Jonah if he couldn't walk the distance. Alara packed supplies, food, blankets, what little medicine they had left. She tried not to think about the fact that she was sending her children away, possibly for the last time. Caleb understood what was happening. She saw it in his face when she explained the plan. You're sending us away so we don't see you die, he said flatly. I'm sending you away so you don't die. There's a difference. Not much of one. Caleb, I'm not stupid, Mama. I know what's happening. Those men want our land and they're going to kill you to get it, just like they killed Daddy. She knelt down, gripped his shoulders. Listen to me. We don't know what's going to happen. Maybe Crow backs down. Maybe the sheriff actually does something. Maybe you win. He said it with the desperate hope of a child who still believed in miracles. Maybe you and Mr. Ronan are strong enough. Maybe we are. Do you believe that? She wanted to lie, wanted to give him false comfort, but he deserved better than that. I believe we're going to try, and sometimes trying is enough. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was all she had. They left at first light, while the riders were presumably still sleeping or planning their next move. Ronan led, breaking trail through snow that came up to his knees. Alara followed with the sled. Jonah bundled on it like precious cargo. Caleb walked beside her, silent and determined, carrying a pack almost as big as he was. The journey was brutal. 8 miles became an eternity of cold and effort. Jonah's coughing got worse despite the scarves wrapped around his face. Caleb stumbled twice, got back up without complaint. Alara's legs burned, her lungs ached, but she kept moving because stopping meant freezing. Ronan never slowed, never looked back, just kept pushing forward with the single-minded focus of a man who understood that survival was measured in steps. They reached the Carlson homestead just before noon. Margaret came out when she saw them approaching, her weathered face creasing with concern. Alara? What's wrong? I need to ask you a favor, a big one. She explained the situation, edited version, leaving out the worst parts. The Carlsons listened without interruption, their expressions growing grimmer with each detail. Of course we'll take the boys, Margaret said immediately. Stay as long as they need. It might be a while. Might be... She couldn't finish the sentence. Eric stepped forward. He was a big man, gone gray and weathered from years of frontier life, but his eyes were sharp. Those riders, they came to our place too a month ago, made the same offer. We said no. What happened? They left, but we've got 3 sons, all grown, all armed. You're alone out there. I'm not alone, she glanced at Ronan. Not anymore. Eric studied Ronan with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen violence. You military? Was. Combat? Yes. Think you can handle 5 men? Depends on the men, and the circumstances, and how lucky we get. Ronan met his gaze evenly. But we're going to try. You need help. No, Alara said it firmly. You've got your own family to protect. This isn't your fight. Maybe it should be. Maybe if enough of us stood together. Maybe. But not today. Today I just need you to keep my boys safe. Margaret had already ushered Caleb and Jonah inside, was getting them warm by the fire. Through the window, Alara could see Jonah drinking something hot, color returning to his cheeks. Caleb sat beside him, watching the door, waiting for her. She went inside, knelt beside her sons one more time. "You're leaving," Caleb said. "I have to." "When will you come back?" "Soon as I can, soon as it's safe." "What if it's not safe? What if you don't—" "Then the Carlsons will take care of you, and you'll take care of Jonah, and you'll grow up strong and smart, and you'll remember that your mama loved you more than anything in this world. You'll remember that, right?" He nodded, tears streaming down his face now. Jonah was crying too, clinging to her dress. She held them both, memorized the weight of them, the smell of their hair, the sound of their breathing. "Be good," she whispered. "Be brave. Be better than this place tried to make you." She kissed them both, stood before she could lose her nerve. Margaret walked her to the door. "I'll keep them safe," the older woman said quietly. "Whatever happens, they'll always have a home here. Thank you. Give those bastards hell, Alara. Show them what happens when they push frontier women too far." The journey back was faster, but harder. No children to slow them down, but also no reason to pretend this was anything other than what it was, walking back to a fight they might not survive. Ronan kept pace beside her, not talking, just present. She was grateful for the silence. Words would have made it worse. They were maybe 2 miles from the cabin when Ronan stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. She froze. "What?" "Smoke. Wrong direction." She looked where he was pointing. Sure enough, a dark column rising against the gray sky. Not from the cabin, from somewhere north of it. Too much smoke for a cooking fire. "The Hendersons," she said, stomach dropping. "Young couple. They homesteaded last spring." They ran. The Henderson place was still burning when they arrived, not the cabin. That was gone. Nothing but smoking ruins. The barn was what remained, flames licking up the walls despite the snow. No sign of the Hendersons. Ronan found them behind what was left of the chicken coop. James Henderson was on his back, 2 bullet holes in his chest. His wife Sarah was beside him, her throat cut. They'd been dead maybe an hour. Alara turned away, bile rising. She'd seen death before. Frontier life guaranteed that. But not like this. Not murder so casual, so efficient. "Don't look," Ronan said quietly. He was checking the bodies, looking for something. This wasn't random. This was a message. What kind of message? The kind that says your time's up. They're done waiting, done negotiating. This is what happens to people who say no. He stood, his face grim. "We need to get back to your cabin. Right now." They were a half-mile out when they saw the riders. All 5 this time, positioned in a line across the trail, blocking the way home. Garrett was in the middle, that same pleasant smile on his face. But the men flanking him weren't pretending to be friendly. They looked like exactly what they were, hired killers, here to do a job. "Mrs. Vance," Garrett called out, "we need to talk. I've got nothing to say to you." "Really? Not even about the Hendersons?" His smile widened. "Tragic, what happened to them. Fire's dangerous out here. People should be more careful." "You murdered them." "I didn't murder anyone. Fire did that. Same fire that might spread if people aren't careful. A lot of dry wood out here, even in winter." Ronan's hand moved to his pistol, but she grabbed his wrist. 5 against 2, out in the open. They'd be dead before they cleared leather. "What do you want?" she asked. "Same thing I wanted yesterday. Your signature on a sale document. Mr. Crow's been very patient, but his patience is exhausted. You've got until sunset to make the right decision. After that," Garrett gestured at the smoke still visible from the Henderson place. "Well, accidents happen. And if I sign, if I give you the land, then you and your boys get to leave here alive. Wealthy, even. Isn't that what you want? Safety for your children?" "My children aren't here." Something flickered in Garrett's expression. "Excuse me?" "They're gone. Safe. You can't touch them." The pleasant mask slipped, just for a second. Behind Garrett, one of the other men, younger, meaner looking, laughed. "Then I guess we don't need to be careful about fires, do we?" He spat in the snow. "Boss said we had to wait if there were kids." Didn't say nothing about a widow and her hired man. Garrett held up a hand. Darius, we're still being civilized here. So that was Crow's second. Darius, the real muscle behind the pleasant words. Alara filed that information away, though she wasn't sure what good it would do. Sunset, Garrett repeated. Make the smart choice, Mrs. Vance. It's the only one that lets you walk away. They turned their horses and rode toward her cabin, not back to the ridge, to her home, making it clear that the choice was already made, the outcome already decided. Ronan waited until they were out of sight before speaking. They're going to burn you out, tonight. I know. You can't defend against that, not just the two of us. I know that too. So what are we going to do? She watched the smoke from the Henderson place, thought about James and Sarah, about how they'd waved at her in town last month, excited about their first winter, full of hope for spring. Gone now. Erased like they'd never existed. We're going to make them regret it, she said. They spent the afternoon planning. Not defense, Ronan was right. They couldn't defend against fire in overwhelming numbers. But they could prepare. They could make the attackers pay a price so high that even victory would hurt. You're talking about an ambush, Ronan said as they worked. I'm talking about survival. Those aren't the same thing. They are when you don't have a choice. He didn't argue. Just helped her set up what he called surprises around the cabin's perimeter. Tripwires connected to pans that would make noise. Positions where they could fire from cover. Escape routes if things went bad. The root cellar, he said as the sun started dropping. If we can get them inside the cabin, looking for us, we can hit them from below. Comes up inside the kitchen, right? Right. So we let them think we're barricaded upstairs. They come in, we come up behind them. Chaos works for us if we use it right. It was a desperate plan, full of risks and assumptions, but it was better than nothing, better than waiting to burn. They ate their last meal in the cabin as darkness fell. Dried meat, hard bread, coffee that was more memory than substance. Neither of them was hungry, but they ate anyway. Fuel for what was coming. I don't know if we're going to survive this, Alara said quietly. Probably not. You could leave, right now. They don't care about you. They'll care once the shooting starts. So leave before it starts. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe this place anything. He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee. I spent 3 years fighting a war, killing people I didn't know for reasons that made less sense the longer it went on. When it ended, I thought I'd feel different. Lighter, maybe. But I just felt empty. He looked up at her. This isn't about owing. This is about choosing. For once in my life, I get to choose what I fight for, who I fight for, and I'm choosing this. You might die for it. Then I'll die doing something that matters. Better than most men get. They finished their coffee in silence, listening to the wind pick up outside, waiting for violence. It came at midnight. The first sound was of the horses. 5 sets of hooves crunching through frozen snow, moving slow and deliberate. Alara heard them from the root cellar where she and Ronan had positioned themselves. The hatch cracked open just enough to see into the kitchen above. Her hands were slick with sweat despite the cold, the rifle feeling heavier than it should. Steady, Ronan whispered beside her. His voice was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. This was it. No more planning, no more waiting, just survival or death, decided in the next few minutes. The horses stopped. Boots hit the ground. She counted the footsteps. 4 men, maybe 5. Hard to tell through the walls. They were talking, but too quiet to make out words. Then Garrett's voice, louder than the others. Mrs. Vance, we know you're in there. Mr. Crow's given you every chance. Time's up now. Silence from the cabin. They'd left a lamp burning upstairs. Shadows moving across the windows from a coat hung on a stick. The oldest trick, but it might buy them a few seconds. Last chance, Garrett called. Come out peaceable, and we'll make this quick. Stay in there, and, well, fire's got no mercy. More silence. Then she heard it, the splash of liquid against wood. Kerosene. They were going to burn her out like the Hendersons, turn Thomas's dream into ash and memory. Boss said torch it, a different voice said, younger, Darius. They had their chance. Wait. That was Garrett, uncertain. Something's wrong. What's wrong is we're freezing our asses off talking to an empty cabin. Light it up. The smell of kerosene grew stronger. Alara's finger tightened on the trigger, but Ronan put his hand over hers. Not yet. Wait. She forced herself to breathe, to think past the panic clawing at her throat. Then came the crash of the door being kicked in. They'd gone for the front entrance, the one Ronan had deliberately left weak. Two men came through, pistols drawn, moving like they knew what they were doing. She recognized one from the ridge, tall, thin, with a scar running down his cheek. The other was younger, maybe 20, trying to look tough and mostly succeeding. "Check upstairs," Scarface said. "I'll get the—" Ronan erupted from the cellar hatch like something feral, pistol swinging up. His first shot caught Scarface in the shoulder, spinning him around. The young one turned, raising his weapon, but Alara was already moving. Her rifle barked once, deafening in the enclosed space, and the kid went down clutching his leg. Then everything was noise and chaos and gun smoke. Scarface was on the ground but still moving, his gun coming up. Ronan kicked it away, brought his boot down hard. Something crunched. Outside, someone was shouting, Garrett's voice, high and panicked. "They're inside! They're in the cellar! They set a trap!" More shots, coming from outside now. Wood splintered above Alara's head. She dropped flat, crawled to the window, risked a look. 3 men out there, spread out, using the horses for cover. No sign of Garrett. He'd probably run the second things went sideways. "Ronan, I see them!" He was at the other window, already firing. One of the horses screamed and bolted, taking cover with it. The man who'd been hiding behind it dove for the barn, made it halfway before Ronan's shot caught him in the back. He went down hard, didn't get up. That left 2. Plus Garrett somewhere in the darkness. Plus the 2 inside, Scarface unconscious or dead, the kid still writhing and bleeding on the kitchen floor. "We need to move," Ronan said. "They'll regroup, come at us different." "Where?" "There's nowhere to—" The window exploded inward, glass and wood frame showering across the floor. Something landed in the middle of the kitchen, burning and reeking of kerosene. A torch. They were burning her out anyway. "Cellar!" Ronan grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the hatch. But fire was already spreading, racing across the floorboards Thomas had laid with his own hands, eating through her home like it was hungry. The heat drove them back. The young kid on the floor was screaming now, trying to crawl away from the flames, but his leg wouldn't work. Alara reached for him instinctively. Just a boy, really, somebody's son, but Ronan pulled her away. He made his choice. Come on. They went out the back door into the snow and darkness. Immediately, gunfire erupted from the barn. Someone had circled around, cut off their escape. Bullets tore through the air where they'd been standing a second before. Ronan pushed her behind the woodshed, returned fire. "How many?" she gasped. "At least 2. Maybe 3 if Garrett grew a spine." The cabin was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the night sky, lighting everything up like daylight. She watched her home burn, felt something break inside her that went deeper than wood and nails. Everything Thomas had built, everything they'd dreamed of, gone. "Alara," Ronan's voice cut through her grief. "I need you here, right now. Focus." She focused, raised her rifle. A shape moved near the barn, and she fired without thinking, saw it drop. Ronan was reloading, his movements mechanical, efficient. She'd never seen anyone move like that. Like violence was just another task, something to be done and moved past. "There's too many," she said. "There's never the right number. We work with what we've got." Another torch came flying through the air, landed in the snow between them and the barn. Whoever was throwing them had good aim. The light made them perfect targets, exposed and vulnerable. "The north field," Ronan said. "There's cover there, trees, we can lose them." "That's half a mile through open ground." "You got a better idea?" She didn't. They ran. Bullets chased them across the meadow, kicking up snow around their feet. Alara's lungs burned, her legs screaming protest, but she kept moving because stopping meant dying. Behind them, the cabin roared like a living thing, collapsing in on itself with a sound like the world ending. They made it to the tree line. Ronan pulled her down behind a fallen log, both of them gasping for air. She could hear the men behind them shouting to each other, organizing. How many were left? 3? 4? Too many, whatever the number. "We can't keep running," she said between breaths. "They'll track us until they find us." "I know." "So what do we do?" He checked his pistol, frowned at what he saw. "How much ammunition you got left?" She counted. 5 rounds. I've got 3. Against at least 3 men, probably more. He looked at her in the darkness, his face half shadow. We can't win a straight fight, so we cheat. How? We make them think they've already won, draw them in close, then we hurt them. It was insane. It was also the only plan they had. They moved deeper into the trees, leaving obvious tracks. Ronan found a small clearing, made sure they'd left signs of struggle, broken branches, disturbed snow. Then they circled back, found positions in the darkness where they could see but not be seen. When they come, he whispered, let them get into the clearing, all of them. Don't shoot until I do. What if they split up? Then we improvise. And probably die. The men came 10 minutes later, moving cautious but confident. She counted 3. Darius in front, followed by 2 others she didn't recognize. No sign of Garrett, still hiding somewhere, letting other men do his killing. Darius stopped at the edge of the clearing, held up a hand. Smart. He was scanning the trees, looking for the trap he knew had to be there. Come on out, Mrs. Vance, he called. Your cabin's gone. Your hired man's bleeding. It's over. We'll make it quick if you surrender. Alara stayed frozen, rifle aimed at center mass. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought they'd hear it. No? Darius smiled. All right then. Boys, spread out. Flush them. Ronan's shot came from darkness, catching one of the men in the throat. He went down choking. Before the others could react, Alara fired, missed, fired again. Her second shot hit the other man in the chest. He stumbled backward, fell. That left Darius. He moved fast, diving for cover behind a tree. His pistol came up, firing blind into the darkness. Bullets tore through branches above Alara's head. She rolled right, came up in a new position, tried to get a bead on him, but he was already moving, using the trees for cover, closing the distance. Ronan! I see him! But Ronan was pinned down, couldn't get a clean shot without exposing himself. Darius was maybe 20 feet away now, working his way around. In seconds, he'd have an angle on her position. She had 3 rounds left, had to make them count. She did something stupid. Stood up, stepped into the open. Darius saw her immediately, his gun swinging around. She fired first, missed. His shot went wide. He was rushing, overconfident. She fired again. This one hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. Her last round jammed. Darius realized it the same moment she did. His smile was ugly, vicious. Empty? She threw the rifle at him. Pathetic gesture. Desperate. He batted it away, raised his pistol. Ronan's shot took him in the side of the head. Darius dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Ronan emerged from the darkness, limping slightly. She hadn't noticed he'd been hit. Blood stained his left leg, dark against the snow. You hurt? I'll live. You? She checked herself, surprised to find she was intact. I think so. They stood there in the clearing, surrounded by bodies, while her home burned in the distance. The snow was stained red in multiple places, and she realized she was shaking. Not from cold, from the reality of what they'd just done, what she'd just done. I killed them, she said. You survived. That's different. Is it? He didn't answer, just reloaded his pistol with hands that shook slightly despite his calm exterior. He was human, after all. Breakable, so scared. We need to move, he said. Garrett's still out there, and there might be others. They started back toward what remained of the cabin. The fire had died down some, but the structure was gone, just the stone chimney standing like a gravestone, marking where her life used to be. Garrett was waiting for them in the barn. They didn't see him until they were inside looking for the horse. He stepped out of the shadows with a rifle pointed at Ronan's head, his face pale and sweating despite the cold. Drop it, he said. His voice was shaking. Drop the gun or I'll kill him. Alara still had Thomas's old pistol tucked in her belt. She could probably draw it before Garrett shot Ronan. Probably. Maybe 50-50 odds at best. All right, she said slowly. We're dropping them. Just stay calm. Calm? Garrett's laugh was hysterical. You killed 4 men, 4 of Crow's best. You think he's going to let this go? You think there's any world where you walk away from this? So shoot us and get it over with. I should. I really should. But he didn't pull the trigger. His hands were shaking too badly, and she realized he'd probably never killed anyone himself. Just watched while other men did it for him. Crow killed my husband, she said quietly. Had him killed, I mean. I'm guessing you were there, watching while someone else made it look like an accident. Garrett's face went even paler. That was business. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. He was everything to me. Those boys lost their father because Crow wanted land. Everyone out here loses someone. That's the frontier. The strong survive. The weak get murdered by cowards. She took a step forward. Garrett's rifle tracked her but didn't fire. That's what you are, isn't it? A coward. Too scared to pull that trigger even though you know you should. Don't, his voice cracked. Don't come closer. She took another step. How many families, Garrett? How many people died so Crow could build his empire? The Hendersons? My Thomas. Who else? It wasn't supposed to be like this. He said we'd just buy them out, peaceful. Nobody had to get hurt if they just took the money, but they did get hurt because they said no, because they believed this land was theirs, that they had rights, that the law mattered. Another step. And you helped him. You're just as guilty as he is. I didn't kill anyone. You just gave the orders. Watched it happen. That's worse, you know. At least the men outside died fighting. You're going to die a coward. I'm not dying. Ronan moved. Not toward Garrett, but sideways, drawing his attention for just a second. That's all Alara needed. She drew Thomas's pistol and fired in the same motion, the way her husband had taught her years ago when wolves prowled the property. The bullet took Garrett in the chest. He looked surprised more than anything else, like he couldn't quite believe what had happened. The rifle dropped from his hands. He tried to say something, but only blood came out. Then he fell. Alara stood there, pistol still raised, watching him die. She felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction. Just empty. We should go, Ronan said quietly, before more come. More will always come, that's what you said. Maybe. But not tonight. Tonight we won. She laughed, sharp and bitter. This is what winning looks like? My home burned, bodies scattered across my property, everything Thomas built destroyed. You're alive. Your boys are alive. That's what winning looks like when the other option is death. He was right. She hated that he was right. They found the horse, Garrett's, well-fed and expensive, and got it saddled. Ronan could barely walk now, his leg wound worse than he'd admitted. She had to help him mount, saw him bite back a grunt of pain. How bad is it? Bad enough, but I've had worse. They rode double toward the Carlson place, leaving behind the burning cabin and the dead men and everything Alara had thought her life was supposed to be. The snow started falling again, gentle and relentless, already beginning to cover the bloodstains. Dawn was breaking when they reached the Carlsons. Margaret came out immediately, took one look at them and started issuing orders. Eric and his sons helped Ronan inside. The boys came running, Caleb first, then Jonah, both of them crashing into Alara like she was salvation itself. Mama, you're alive! I'm alive, baby. We're alive. She held them while Margaret worked on Ronan's leg, while Eric rode out to check what remained of the homestead, while the sun climbed higher and turned the bloody snow to pink slush. She held them and tried not to think about Garrett's face as he died, about the men in the clearing, about the young kid burning in her kitchen. She'd wanted to be strong. She'd wanted to protect her home, her children, her husband's memory. Instead, she'd become exactly what the frontier demanded. Someone who could kill and keep breathing, who could watch dreams burn and still find reasons to survive. What happens now? Caleb asked. His face was pressed against her shoulder, muffling his voice. Good question. Crow would know by morning what had happened, would send more men, better men. The law wouldn't help. If there was law out here at all, it belonged to whoever had the most guns. I don't know, she admitted, but we'll figure it out, together. Eric came back 2 hours later, his face grim. The cabin's gone. Nothing left but the foundation. But I found something you need to see. He led her to the barn, insisted she come, wouldn't say why. Inside, in Garrett's saddlebags, he showed her papers. Deeds, sale documents, records of every property Crow had acquired in the valley over the past 3 years, including one for her land signed in Thomas's name, forged, obviously. But it was dated 2 days after he died. He was going to take it anyway, Eric said quietly. Whether you signed or not. The offer was just theater, making it look legitimate, but he'd already decided the land was his. She stared at Thomas's forged signature, at the evidence of how little any of it had mattered. All the fighting, all the death. Crow had never planned to let her keep the homestead. Had probably already killed Thomas for refusing to sell, then played games with her because he could. Something cold and hard settled in her chest, replacing the numbness. "Where does Crow live?" she asked. "Chester Flats. Big house on the hill." "Why?" "Because this isn't over." She looked at Ronan, who was awake now despite Margaret's orders to rest. "We heard him tonight. Took out his men. Burned his plans. But unless we finish this, he'll just keep coming." "You want to go after him?" Ronan said it as a statement, not a question. "I want to end this, one way or another." "That's suicide. He'll have more guards, more guns. Place will be a fortress." "So we don't go through the front door. You said you were good at tactics. Can you think of a way?" He studied her for a long moment. Then, despite the pain, despite everything, he smiled. "Yeah, I can think of a way, but it's crazy. Crazy's worked pretty well for us so far." They spent the rest of the day planning. Eric and his sons wanted to help, but Alara refused. This was her fight, her responsibility. She wouldn't drag anyone else into it. Besides, there was something she needed to do first. She asked Margaret for paper and ink, sat at the Carlsons' kitchen table while her boys slept, and wrote everything down. Every detail of what Crow had done, the murders, the intimidation, the forged documents. She wrote about the Hendersons, about Thomas, about every family she knew who'd been pushed off their land or bought out for nothing. She sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to the territorial governor in Helena. If we don't come back," she told Eric, "make sure that gets delivered. Make sure someone knows what happened here." "You will come back." "Maybe. But just in case." The ride to Chester Flats took most of the night. They left the boys with Margaret, both of them sleeping and unaware their mother was riding toward almost certain death. Better that way. Some things children shouldn't have to know. Ronan's leg was barely holding him, but he refused to stay behind. They made a pair, limping soldier and widow turned killer, heading toward violence because violence was all they had left. Chester Flats was bigger than Alara remembered, grown fat on Crow's money. The main street was lined with buildings that looked too new, too expensive for a frontier town. Crow's house sat at the north end, 3 stories of imported lumber and glass windows. It looked obscene against the rough landscape, a monument to greed. "There'll be guards," Ronan said. They were watching from the tree line, horses hidden behind them. "At least 3, maybe more inside." "Can we get past them?" "Get past. No, get through." He smiled grimly. "That's different." What they did next would have been impossible without Ronan's training and Alara's desperation. They waited until the guard rotation changed at midnight, caught one man alone. Ronan put him down quiet, took his coat and hat. Then they walked right up to the front door like they belonged there. The guard there recognized neither of them, but Ronan's stolen coat bought them 5 seconds. That's all they needed. Alara hit the man with Thomas's pistol, caught him as he fell. They dragged him inside before anyone noticed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Alara's heart was hammering as they moved through rooms filled with furniture that cost more than her homestead, past artwork that had no business being in Montana territory. Every luxury built on stolen land and murdered families. They found Crow in his study working late over papers. He looked up when they entered, surprised but not frightened. Not yet. "Mrs. Vance, I heard you had some trouble tonight." His voice was smooth, educated. Nothing like the rough frontier men who worked for him. "Terrible business with your cabin. I hope you're not here to blame me for that." "I'm here to end this," she said flatly. "End what? I'm just a businessman. I make offers. Sometimes people accept, sometimes they don't." He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "What happened at your property? That was unfortunate. Self-defense, I assume. My men were trying to help, and you shot them." "They murdered the Hendersons. They murdered my husband." "Did they? Can you prove that? Because all I see is a widow who's gone mad with grief, killing good men and burning her own property for insurance money." He smiled. "That's what the law will see too, Mrs. Vance. That's what everyone will see when the smoke clears." Ronan raised his pistol. "Here's what I see. A man who's run out of time." "You're going to shoot me? In my own home?" Crow laughed. "There are witnesses, guards. You'll hang." "Maybe, but you'll be dead." For the first time, fear flickered across Crow's face. Wait, we can make a deal. I've got money, influence. Whatever you want. I want my husband back, Elara said. Can you give me that? Silence. That's what I thought. She took Thomas's pistol from her belt. You took everything from me. My home, my future. You left me with nothing but 2 boys and a choice, run or fight. Well, I fought, and I won. So now I'm here to collect. You can't sign it. Ronan tossed papers onto the desk, the forged deeds from Garrett's saddlebags. Confess to what you did. Every property, every murder. Write it all down. I'll do no such... Elara's shot shattered a lamp beside Crow's head. He jerked back, eyes wide. Next one goes in your knee, she said. Then the other one. Then we work our way up. You're going to write that confession if I have to break every bone in your body first. He looked at her face and saw his death there. Saw that she meant every word. He started writing. It took Crow 20 minutes to write it all down. His hand shook so badly the words were barely legible, but Elara watched every letter form, every date recorded. The Henderson property, acquired 3 months ago after James Henderson's accidental death. The Morrison Ranch, taken when the family mysteriously abandoned it after their daughter disappeared. Thomas Vance, killed when he refused to sell, his death staged to look like a logging accident. 15 properties in total. 12 deaths that could be proven. Dozens more families driven out through intimidation, their claims forfeited when they couldn't make payments Crow had deliberately made impossible. Sign it, Ronan said when Crow's pen finally stopped moving. If I sign this, I'm a dead man. The territorial government will hang me. And if you don't sign it, I'll shoot you right now. At least the rope gives you a few more weeks to live. Crow signed. His name looked like a child's scrawl at the bottom of his confession, shaky and desperate. Elara took the papers, folded them carefully, tucked them inside her coat next to the letter she'd written for the governor. What now? Crow asked. Some of his composure was returning now that the immediate threat of violence had passed. You have your confession. You gonna shoot me anyway? Elara looked at him, really looked. He was maybe 50 years old, soft around the middle, hands that had never done hard labor. Everything about him screamed wealth and comfort built on other people's suffering. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd planned, about her boys growing up without their father because this man wanted land. She raised the pistol. Elara, Ronan's voice was quiet. Think about this. I have thought about it every night for 6 months. If you kill him now, you're a murderer. That confession won't matter. They'll hang you for this. Maybe that's fair. What about your boys? They need you. That stopped her. The pistol wavered. Caleb and Jonah, asleep at the Carlsons, trusting she'd come back, trusting she'd choose them over revenge. He killed Thomas, she said, but her voice was weaker now. He did, and he'll pay for that. But not like this. Not with you throwing your life away. She wanted to pull the trigger so badly her hand ached. Wanted to watch Crow's blood soak into his expensive carpet. Wanted him to feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused. But Ronan was right. Killing him accomplished nothing except making her boys orphans. She lowered the gun. You're making a mistake, Crow said, and she heard the confidence creeping back into his voice. That confession won't hold up. I was coerced, threatened. Any judge will throw it out. And when that happens, when I walk free, you better pray you're already out of Montana territory, because I'll hunt you and those boys to the ends of the earth. Shut up, Ronan said flatly. You think you've won? You destroyed one cabin, killed a few hired men. I've got resources you can't imagine. Connections in Helena, in Washington. I'll bury you both. Elara felt something snap inside her. She'd tried to be better than him, tried to choose the high road, but some men only understood one language. She shot him in the hand. The explosion was deafening in the closed study. Crow screamed, clutching his ruined hand to his chest. Blood sprayed across the papers on his desk, across his expensive suit. He fell out of his chair, writhing on the floor. You crazy? He couldn't finish the sentence through the pain. You shot me. That's for Thomas, Elara said coldly. She walked around the desk, stood over him while he bled. You're right that you might walk free. Money and connections can buy a lot. But you'll never forget this night. Every time you look at that hand, you'll remember the widow you tried to destroy. You'll remember that all your power, all your influence couldn't protect you when justice came calling. I'll kill you, Crow gasped. I swear to... She shot him in the other hand. His scream was inhuman, pure animal agony. Ronan grabbed her arm before she could fire a third time. That's enough. We need to leave. Now. She let him pull her away. Behind them, Crow was sobbing, cursing, promising revenge between broken gasps. The sound followed them through the house, out into the cold night air where other guards were finally responding to the gunshots. They ran for the horses. Bullets whined past them in the darkness. Wild shots, panicked men firing at shadows. Ronan took a round in the shoulder but kept moving, pulling himself onto his horse through pure determination. They galloped out of Chester Flats with half a dozen men giving chase, the confession and forged deeds secured in Alara's coat. They lost their pursuers 2 miles outside town, the darkness and terrain working in their favor. But Ronan was in bad shape, bleeding from 2 wounds now. They stopped at a stream to assess the damage. How bad? Alara asked, helping him down from the horse. Bad enough. His face was gray with pain, his breathing shallow. Shoulders through and through, clean, but the leg... He didn't finish the sentence. She tore strips from her shirt, bandaged him as best she could. The shoulder wound wasn't bleeding too badly, but the leg was worse. The old wound had reopened, compromised by the new injury and all the riding. He needed a doctor, proper care. Needed things she couldn't provide in the middle of nowhere. We should go to town, she said. Find help. No town. They'll be watching for us. He managed a weak smile. Guess we're outlaws now. I shot a man, twice, in his own home. The reality was starting to sink in, replacing the adrenaline with cold fear. What have I done? You survived, again. For how long? Crow was right. We can't run forever. He's got resources, connections. Even with the confession, he might still win. Then we make sure he doesn't. Ronan pulled himself upright with a grunt. We get that confession to the governor. We tell the whole story, get it in front of people who matter. Make enough noise that Crow can't silence us. You really think that'll work? I think it's the only shot we've got. They rode through the night, heading north toward Helena. The territorial capital was 3 days away at a hard pace, longer if they had to avoid towns and main roads. Ronan was fading. She could see it in the way he slumped in the saddle, the way his responses grew slower. He wouldn't make it 3 days without medical attention. Dawn found them at an abandoned trapper's cabin, one of dozens that dotted the territory. Empty for years, but the roof was intact and it offered shelter from the wind. Alara got Ronan inside, got a fire started, checked his wounds. The shoulder was inflamed but manageable. The leg was infected. You need a doctor, she said flatly. What I need is to not get caught. Doctor asks questions, word spreads. By nightfall, Crow's men would know exactly where we are. So you're just going to die slowly instead of getting help? I'm not going to die. But he said it without conviction, the way people did when they were trying to convince themselves. I've survived worse. She didn't believe him. Neither did he. She spent the day keeping the fire going, boiling water to clean his wounds, trying to remember everything Thomas had taught her about frontier medicine. It wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. By evening, Ronan was delirious with fever, muttering about things that happened in the war, calling out names of people who were probably dead. Alara sat beside him, holding the confession that had cost so much to obtain, and wondered if it was worth it. If any of this was worth it. She'd lost her home, her husband, probably Ronan too. Her boys were safe for now, but what kind of life could she give them? On the run, hunted, their mother a wanted criminal who'd shot a powerful man in cold blood? Should have just taken the money, she said to the empty cabin. Should have sold and moved east, started over somewhere Crow's reach didn't extend. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Some things you couldn't compromise on. Some lines couldn't be crossed. Thomas had understood that. It's why he'd refused to sell, why he died rather than surrender what was his. She'd tried to honor that principle, and it had led here, to a dying man in an abandoned cabin, to a future that looked more like ending than beginning. Ronan's fever broke near midnight. He woke confused, disoriented, but alive. Alara fed him water, watched relief flood through her so strong it hurt. How long was I out? Most of the day, I thought. She couldn't finish. I'm tougher than I look. He tried to sit up, failed. We need to keep moving. You can barely stand. Don't need to stand, just need to ride. Ronan, listen to me. His voice was weak but urgent. Crow knows we're heading to Helena. He'll have men on every road watching every town. We're not going to make it if we take the obvious route. So what do we do? There's another way. Through the mountains. Old mining trail barely used anymore. Takes twice as long, but Crow's men won't be watching it. You can't ride through mountains in your condition. I can if the alternative is getting caught. He met her eyes. You've come too far to quit now. We both have. So we finish this. Together. They left at dawn, Ronan barely able to stay in the saddle. The mining trail was exactly as described. Barely a trail at all, more suggestion than path. It wound through terrain so rough even the horses struggled, climbing toward passes where the air turned thin and every breath felt insufficient. Ronan lasted 2 days before he fell from his horse. Alara was beside him in seconds, rolling him over, checking for injuries. He was unconscious again, fever back and worse than before. His leg was a mess of infection and inflamed tissue, the kind of wound that killed men slowly out here where doctors were scarce and medicine scarcer. She was 3 days from Helena, maybe 4 at the pace Ronan could manage. He wouldn't survive that long. She could see it in the gray pallor of his skin, the way his pulse fluttered weak and irregular. He was dying. She had 2 choices: stay with him and watch him die, or leave him here and push on alone. The confession in her coat pocket suddenly felt heavier than it should, weighted with all the lives that depended on it reaching the right hands. I'm sorry, she whispered to Ronan's unconscious form. I'm so sorry. She took his pistol, his ammunition, left him most of the food and water, built up the fire so it would burn for hours. Then she mounted her horse and rode away, hating herself with every step. The mountains tried to kill her. Storm after storm rolled through, each worse than the last. The trail disappeared under snow, reappeared, vanished again. Twice she got turned around, wasted hours backtracking. Her food ran out on day 3. On day 4, her horse went lame and she had to continue on foot. She thought about Thomas, about the dreams they'd shared. Thought about her boys, hopefully safe with the Carlsons, maybe growing up believing she'd abandoned them. Thought about Ronan, dying alone in those mountains because she'd made a choice. On the 5th day, more dead than alive, she stumbled into Helena. The territorial capital was bigger than any town she'd seen in Montana. Real buildings, paved streets, people who looked like they'd never struggled for survival. She made it to the governor's office before collapsing on the steps. Someone caught her. Multiple someones. Voices asking questions she couldn't answer. She clutched the papers inside her coat, tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Then darkness took her, and she surrendered to it gratefully. She woke in a bed. Clean sheets, warm room, windows that showed a city street outside. For a moment she thought she'd dreamed everything. The attack, the fire, Ronan, all of it just fever nightmare. Then she tried to move and pain lanced through her frost-damaged feet, her exhausted body, and she knew it had all been real. Easy now. A woman appeared beside the bed, older, kind-faced. You've been out for 2 days. Doctor said it was touch and go there for a while. My boys, safe. We sent word to Chester Flats. The Carlsons have them. No. Alara tried to sit up, panic flooding through her. Don't contact Chester Flats. Crow will know. He'll find them. Mr. Crow is under arrest, dear. Has been for 3 days now. The woman smiled. Those papers you brought, the confession? Governor read them himself. Sent marshals to Chester Flats immediately. They arrested Crow, seized his property records, everything. It's been quite the scandal. Alara stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. He's arrested? Really arrested? Being held in the territorial prison. They're building a case, but with his confession and all the evidence you provided, it's just a formality. He'll hang, most likely. She should have felt relief, triumph, something. Instead, she just felt empty, hollowed out by everything it had cost to reach this moment. There was a man, she said. Ronan Hale. He was with me, got injured. I left him in an old cabin off the mining trail, maybe 4 days back. Is there any way? We'll send someone to look. Can you describe the location? She did her best, knowing it probably wasn't enough. The mountains were vast, the trail barely existed. Finding one man in all that wilderness was like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. I left him there, she said quietly. Left him to die so I could get here. Some of the people Crow killed, I didn't even know their names. But I knew Ronan. He saved my life, my boys' lives, and I left him. You made an impossible choice. That doesn't make it right. The woman didn't argue, just squeezed Alara's hand and left her alone with her guilt. The territorial governor came to see her that afternoon. He was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with the careful bearing of a politician and the sharp eyes of someone who'd fought his way to power. Mrs. Vance, I'm Governor Harrison. I want to personally thank you for what you've done. That confession, it's opened up an investigation we should have started years ago. You knew. She said it flatly, without accusation, just fact. You knew what Crow was doing, we suspected. But suspicion isn't proof, and Crow was careful, powerful. He had friends in Washington, money to make problems disappear. Harrison pulled up a chair, sat like he had all day. What you brought us, that's proof. That's justice. Justice. The word tasted bitter. Justice for Thomas, for the Hendersons, for all the others. But what about me? What about my boys? Our home is gone. We've got nothing. The territory will compensate you for your loss. We're seizing Crow's assets, and I don't want his money. I want my husband back. I want my home, my life, everything he took. She was crying now, couldn't stop herself. I want it to not have happened. Can you give me that? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. No, I can't give you that. Nobody can. But I can promise you this. Every family Crow displaced, every person he hurt, they'll get justice. We're going through his records, contacting victims, making restitution. It won't undo what happened, but it's something. It's not enough. No, it's not. But it's what we have. He left her with papers to sign, testimony to give. Official business that felt meaningless after everything she'd been through. She signed where they told her, answered questions, played her part in the machinery of justice. But inside she was still on that mountain, still walking away from Ronan, still making the choice that saved many but condemned one. 3 days later they brought him in. Alara was in the governor's office giving another statement when the commotion started outside. Voices raised, people rushing toward the entrance. She followed, not sure what to expect. Ronan was on a stretcher, barely conscious, but alive. A search party had found him exactly where she'd described, 3 days of hard riding through mountain passes that should have been impossible. He looked worse than death, gaunt, pale, leg wrapped in heavy bandages. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, he managed something that might have been a smile. You made it, he rasped. So did you. She grabbed his hand, held it like he might disappear if she let go. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you. You did what you had to, got the job done. He coughed, winced. Crow? Arrested, awaiting trial. Your confession worked. Our confession. Couldn't have done it without you. His eyes were closing again, exhaustion pulling him under. Your boys? Safe. With the Carlsons. Good. That's good. He was fading fast, but he forced his eyes open one more time. We won, Alara. Against all odds, we actually won. Then he was unconscious again, doctors surrounding him, moving him to a room where they could work. Alara watched them take him away and felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, but close. One less weight to carry. The trial happened 6 weeks later. Alara testified, told the whole story from Thomas's death to her confrontation with Crow. The courtroom was packed. Families of Crow's victims, journalists, politicians who saw advantage in his fall. Crow sat in chains, his hands still bandaged, his face a mask of impotent rage. His lawyers tried every trick, claimed the confession was coerced, that Alara was an unreliable witness, that the whole case was built on circumstantial evidence. But the forged deeds matched handwriting samples. The families corroborated the pattern. Physical evidence from the Henderson murders lined up with Garrett's belongings. The verdict took 3 hours. Guilty on 12 counts of murder, 14 counts of fraud, 8 counts of conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to hang, and the courtroom erupted in cheers. Alara felt nothing. The verdict didn't bring Thomas back, didn't rebuild her cabin, didn't erase the nightmares that woke her every night. It was just words, just official recognition that what she'd always known was true. Afterward, outside the courthouse, families approached her, thanking her, crying, sharing their own stories of loss. She listened to them all, heard the echoes of her own pain in their voices. So many lives destroyed, so much suffering for one man's greed. "You're a hero," one woman said, clutching Alara's hands. "You saved us all." But Alara didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd survived when she shouldn't have, who'd done terrible things for necessary reasons, who'd lost pieces of herself she'd never get back. Heroes were supposed to feel good about their victories. She just felt tired. Ronan found her an hour later, sitting alone on the courthouse steps. He was walking with a cane now, his leg permanently damaged but functional. The doctor said he'd never run again, never ride long distances without pain. Battle scars to match the ones inside. "You all right?" he asked, settling beside her with a grunt. "I don't know what I am anymore." "That's fair. I've been where you are. Takes time to figure out who you are after violence changes you." "Does it get easier?" "No, but you get better at carrying it." They sat in silence for a while, watching Helena go about its business. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of what it took to maintain the peace they took for granted. "What happens now?" Alara asked. "Where do we go from here?" "That's up to you. Governor's offering you compensation, enough to start over anywhere you want. Could go back east, give your boys a civilized life. Schools, safety, all of it." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her then, understanding in his eyes. "No, I suppose it wasn't. My boys need their mother, need stability, routine, all the things I can't give them right now, but they also need to know that sometimes you stand and fight, that some things are worth whatever they cost." She paused. "Thomas's land, what's left of it? I'm going back, going to rebuild." "That's going to be hard. Place is just ruins." "Then I'll build from ruins. Thomas did it once. I can do it again." "You'll need help." "I know." Ronan smiled. "I don't have anywhere else to be." They returned to the homestead in early spring when the snow was melting and the ground was soft enough to dig. Alara brought her boys back from the Carlsons, watched their faces as they saw what remained of their home. Just the stone chimney standing like a gravestone, blackened timbers scattered across the foundation, everything else gone to ash and memory. Jonah started crying immediately. Caleb stood frozen, his face blank in that way children got when the pain was too big for tears. Alara knelt between them, pulled them close. "I know," she said quietly. "I know it looks bad, but we're going to fix it. We're going to build something new here." "Why?" Caleb's voice was hollow. "Why come back? Everything's gone." "Not everything. The land's still here. The spring your daddy found, the south pasture where the grass grows tall, the view of the mountains he loved so much. Those are still here. And we are. That's enough to start with." "Is Mr. Ronan staying?" Jonah asked, wiping his eyes. Ronan was standing near what used to be the barn, leaning on his cane, studying the wreckage. He looked over at the question, met Alara's eyes. An entire conversation passed between them in that glance. Questions about commitment, about futures neither of them could predict, about whether they were building something together or just surviving side by side. "Yeah," Ronan said. "I'm staying. If that's all right with you boys?" Jonah nodded immediately. Caleb took longer, but finally he nodded too. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was acceptance. Good enough for now. They set up camp at the meadow that first night, too tired to do more than pitch tents and cook a simple meal. Alara lay awake, listening to her boys breathe, listening to the wind move through trees Thomas had cleared, and tried to imagine what came next. The governor had given her money, blood money, compensation for suffering, call it what you wanted. Enough to rebuild, to stock supplies, to hire help if she needed it. But money couldn't buy back the innocence her boys had lost. Couldn't erase the nightmares that still woke her screaming. In the morning, they started clearing the debris. It took 3 weeks just to haul away the burned timber, sort through the wreckage looking for anything salvageable. They found Thomas's tools in what used to be the shed, scorched but functional. Found Alara's mother's china, miraculously intact in a corner that hadn't burned. Found Caleb's letter book, pages warped and smoke-stained but readable. Small pieces of their old life, recovered from the ashes. Eric Carlson and his sons came to help, brought lumber and nails and strong backs. Other homesteaders followed, people Alara barely knew, families she'd nodded to in town but never spoken with. They came because they'd heard what she'd done, how she'd stood up to Crow when everyone else was too scared. They came because her fight had become their fight, and her victory meant they could all sleep a little easier. "Didn't know we had this many friends," Alara said, watching a dozen men raise the frame for the new cabin. "You don't make friends in good times," Eric said. "You make them when you're willing to bleed for something that matters. Word got around about what you did. People respect that. I just did what I had to. That's all any of us can do. But you did it when most would have run. That counts for something." The new cabin went up faster than Thomas's original, but it felt different. Bigger, sturdier, designed by people who'd learned hard lessons about Montana winters. Ronan worked alongside the other men despite his bad leg, doing what he could, earning his place through effort rather than words. Alara watched him teach Caleb how to properly set a nail, watched Jonah follow him around asking endless questions, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love. Too soon for that. Too raw. But possibility. The shape of what might come if they all survived long enough to find out. 2 months after they broke ground, the cabin was finished. Not beautiful, not fancy, but solid. Real. A home built by community. Proof that sometimes people could still come together for reasons other than profit or fear. They held a raising party, everyone who'd helped bringing food and drink, celebrating completion. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, Alara kept thinking about the faces missing. Thomas, who should have been here. The Hendersons, all the others Crow had taken. "You're allowed to be happy," Ronan said quietly. They were standing apart from the celebration, watching people dance while someone played fiddle. "It doesn't dishonor the dead to keep living." "How do you know? You carry ghosts, too. I see it in your face sometimes when you think nobody's watching." "I do. Dozen men I killed in the war, maybe more. Faces I remember when I close my eyes." He was quiet for a moment. "But I learned something carrying that weight. The dead don't want us to suffer. They want us to make their deaths mean something. You did that. You brought down Crow, saved families, changed things. Thomas would be proud." "Would he? I killed people, Ronan. Shot them, watched them die. I left you in those mountains to die alone. That's who I became. I'm not sure Thomas would recognize me." "Maybe not. War changes people. Survival changes people. But you're still here, still fighting for your boys, still trying to build something good. That's who you are. The rest is just what you had to do to get here." She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that the woman who'd shot Crow's hands, who'd left bodies across her property, who'd chosen justice over mercy, that woman wasn't her real self, just some temporary version created by necessity. But she wasn't sure anymore where the line was between who she'd been and who she'd become. The summer passed in hard work and small victories. They planted crops, repaired the barn, bought new livestock with the governor's money. Caleb and Jonah adapted the way children did, their resilience both heartbreaking and inspiring. They still had nightmares, still flinched at sudden noises, but they also laughed more as the months went by. Started to believe maybe that the danger had passed. In August, word came that Crow had hanged. Alara was in the garden when Eric rode up with the news, his face troubled. She listened to the details, how Crow had maintained his innocence to the end, how he'd cursed her name on the scaffold, how the territorial marshal had made sure every family affected got to witness justice served. She should have felt satisfaction, closure, something. Instead, she just felt tired. "It's over then," she said. "Mostly. Few of his associates are still being rounded up, but the organization's broken. Land office is being cleaned out, lots of claims being reviewed. Some families are getting their property back." Eric paused. "You did this. All of it. We did this. You, Ronan, everyone who helped. I just lit the match. Don't sell yourself short. You stood when others couldn't. That matters." After he left, she walked out to the meadow where Thomas was buried. She'd placed a proper marker there last month, his name and dates carved into local stone. Sat beside it now, pulled weeds from around the base. "They hanged him," she told the marker. "Crow's dead. Justice served, whatever that means." She was quiet for a while, listening to wind in the grass. "I don't know if you'd be proud of what I did to get here. I'm not proud of all of it, but I kept the boys safe, kept the land. That's what you wanted, right? For this place to mean something?" No answer, just wind and silence. She hadn't expected one. The dead didn't give absolution or approval. They just stayed dead while the living figured out how to keep going. "I'm going to be okay," she said finally. "We're going to be okay. I wanted you to know that. Wherever you are, whatever happens next, we're going to be okay." She walked back to the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors Thomas had loved. Found Ronan on the porch, whittling something from a piece of pine. He'd been making toys for the boys, small figures and animals that appeared on their beds like gifts from some benevolent spirit. Never took credit, never mentioned it, just left them there and moved on. "You all right?" he asked without looking up. "Crow's dead." His knife paused mid-stroke. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know. Empty, mostly. Like I spent 6 months pushing toward this moment, and now that it's here, I don't know what to do with it." "That's normal. Revenge doesn't fill the holes it promises to." "Is that from experience?" "Yeah. I tracked down the officer who gave the orders that got half my unit killed. Found him in a saloon in Kansas, drinking himself stupid. Put a gun to his head, ready to pull the trigger." He resumed whittling, his movements steady. "But standing there, I realized killing him wouldn't bring anyone back, wouldn't undo what happened, would just add one more ghost to my collection, so I walked away." "Do you regret that?" "Sometimes. Other times I'm grateful. Killing him would have been easy. Living with not killing him, learning to carry the anger without letting it consume me, that was harder. But I think I'm better for it. I didn't walk away. I shot Crow, hurt him, left him to hang." "You did. But you also stopped yourself from killing him outright, chose the law over personal revenge. That counts for something." "Does it? Because I still see his face sometimes. Still hear him screaming. You will for a while. Maybe forever. But it'll get quieter. The ghosts always do if you don't feed them." He finished the carving, held it up. A small horse, remarkably detailed. "This is for Jonah. Kid's been asking about getting a pony." "We can't afford a pony." "I know, but we can afford dreams. Sometimes that's enough to keep going." Fall came hard and fast, the way it did in Montana. They worked to prepare, cutting firewood, preserving food, making sure every gap in the walls was sealed. This winter wouldn't be like the last one. This winter they had supplies, support, community. This winter they'd survive not through desperation, but through preparation. One evening in October, after the boys were asleep, Elara and Ronan sat by the fire talking about nothing important. The harvest, the weather, plans for spring planting, comfortable silence between the words, the kind that came from shared experience and mutual understanding. "I've been thinking," Ronan said eventually, "about staying." "You are staying. I mean permanently. Not just until spring, not just until you're established. Permanently." He looked at her, his expression careful. "If you'd want that." "Why wouldn't I want that?" "Because I'm damaged goods. Bad leg, worse memories, not much of a future to offer. You're young, smart, capable. You could do better than a broken-down soldier with nothing to his name. I'm damaged too, we both are. That's not disqualifying, isn't it? You deserve someone whole, someone who can give your boys a real father, someone without all this—" He gestured vaguely at himself. "Baggage." "Ronan." She waited until he looked at her. "I watched my husband die. I killed people to protect my children. I shot a man's hands off and felt nothing. We're past worrying about baggage. The question isn't whether we're damaged. It's whether we can build something real despite that damage. Can we?" "I don't know, but I'd like to try." He smiled then, genuine and warm. "Yeah, me too." They didn't kiss, didn't make grand declarations. Just sat there as the fire burned low, two broken people deciding to be broken together. It wasn't romance, wasn't anything you'd read in books, but it was real. And after everything, real was enough. Winter tested them, but they held. The cabin stayed warm, the food lasted, the boys stayed healthy. They celebrated Christmas with the Carlsons and other neighbors, a proper frontier gathering with too much food and not enough inhibitions. Caleb and Jonah got gifts, real toys from town, new clothes that fit, books for learning. They'd lost so much, but they were gaining it back in different forms. In February, a letter arrived from the territorial governor. More families were suing for restitution against Crow's estate. The investigation had uncovered even more crimes, more victims. They wanted Elara to testify again, help build cases against the remaining associates who'd enabled Crow's empire. Do I have to go? She asked Ronan after reading it. No, you've done enough, more than enough. Let someone else carry it from here. But if I don't testify, some of those men might walk free. Maybe. But you've given enough years to this fight. At some point, you have to choose between justice and peace. Sometimes you can't have both. She thought about it for 3 days, weighed responsibility against exhaustion, duty against survival. In the end, she wrote back declining. She'd opened the door, shined light into dark places. Other people could walk through, finish the work. She had her own life to rebuild, her own family to protect. That had to be enough. Spring came late but strong, snow melting in torrents, the land turning green almost overnight. They planted more than the year before, expanded the garden, talked about building a proper barn. The boys were growing, Caleb nearly as tall as Alara now, Jonah losing his baby face. They talked about their father sometimes, but it was getting easier. Memory without the raw edge of fresh grief. In May, a stranger rode up to the homestead. Alara saw him coming from the garden, felt that old spike of fear. But he was alone, unarmed, hands visible and empty. Just a man on a horse, not a threat. "Mrs. Vance?" he called from a respectful distance. "That's me." He dismounted, pulled papers from his saddlebag. "I'm Samuel Brooks, attorney from Helena. I have news about the Crow estate settlement." She walked closer, Ronan emerging from the barn with a rifle just in case. Old habits died hard. "What kind of news?" "The estate's been liquidated. After restitution to victims and legal fees, there's a surplus. The court voted to distribute it among the families most affected by Crow's crimes. Your family is receiving the largest share." He handed her the papers. "It's substantial, Mrs. Vance. Enough to buy more land, expand operations, enough to set your boys up for life." She looked at the numbers, felt dizzy. This was more money than Thomas would have seen in a lifetime of hard work. Blood money, stolen from others, and returned through judicial process. It felt wrong taking it, felt like profiting from suffering. "What if I don't want it?" she asked. Brooks looked confused. "Ma'am, you're entitled to this. The court determined—" "I know what the court determined, but this money came from people Crow stole from, families he destroyed. Doesn't feel right keeping it. The other victims have been compensated. This is surplus. You can refuse it, but it'll just go to the territorial treasury. Won't help anyone." She looked at Ronan, saw him shrug. "Your choice." She looked at her boys, watching from the porch. Thought about all the things money could buy. Education, security, futures they wouldn't have otherwise. "All right," she said finally. "But I want to use some of it to help other families. The ones still struggling, still trying to rebuild. Can we do that?" "However you want to use it is your business, ma'am." She signed the papers, watched Brooks right away. Stood there holding documentation that said she was wealthy now, that her struggles were over in the material sense at least. It didn't feel like victory, just felt like the universe's way of keeping score, balancing books that couldn't really be balanced. "What are you going to do with it?" Ronan asked. "Some for the boys, college funds, or whatever they want to do with their lives. Some to expand this place, maybe hire proper help, and the rest—" She looked around at the land Thomas had loved, at the community that had saved them. "The rest goes toward building something better. A school maybe, or a proper hospital, something that helps everyone, not just us." "That's a good use." "It's the only use that makes sense. Otherwise, it's just money built on suffering, and we've had enough of that." Summer passed in work and growth. They expanded the cabin, added a second floor with proper bedrooms, hired 2 men from town to help with the heavy labor, paid them fair wages, bought cattle, good breeding stock that would establish a proper herd. Started planning the school Alara had promised herself, working with other families to find land and funding. The nightmares came less frequently now. Alara still woke sometimes gasping, still saw Crow's face or heard gunshots in her dreams. But she was learning what Ronan had meant about ghosts getting quieter. They didn't leave, but they stopped screaming. Became part of the background noise of living rather than the main event. In August, on what would have been her 10th wedding anniversary, she took flowers to Thomas's grave. Ronan offered to come, but she went alone, needed this moment private. Sat beside the marker and told her dead husband about everything that had happened, everything they'd built. "I'm going to marry him," she said quietly. "Ronan, not right away, but eventually. I wanted you to know, wanted you to understand." It's not that I stopped loving you, but I can't live in the past forever. The boys need stability, need to see that life goes on, and I need—" She paused, searching for words. "I need to believe that what we had wasn't the end of happiness, that I'm allowed to find it again in different forms." The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and pine. She chose to interpret that as blessing, or at least acceptance. The dead couldn't give permission, but they couldn't withhold it either. She was the one who had to decide how to live with their memory. "Thank you," she said finally, "for bringing me here, for giving me the boys, for teaching me how to fight. I wouldn't have survived without everything you taught me. I hope wherever you are, you're proud. I hope you know that your dream didn't die with you. It just changed shape, became something different. But it's still here, still real." She walked back to the cabin as the sun set, found Ronan teaching the boys how to fish in the creek. They'd caught 3 already, small but respectable. Jonah was laughing at something Caleb said, and Ronan was smiling in that quiet way he had. It looked normal, felt normal, like a family finding its shape. "Mama, look!" Jonah held up a fish proudly. "Mr. Ronan says we can have them for dinner." "Mr. Ronan says a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're all true." "I resent that," Ronan said without heat. "I'm a very truthful person. You told Jonah that fish grow big enough to eat horses. That's not untrue, just unlikely in this particular creek." She laughed, real and unforced, sat down beside them, and watched her boys fish while the man who'd saved their lives coached them through it. This wasn't the life she'd imagined back in Boston, wasn't even the life Thomas had promised. But it was hers, earned through blood and sacrifice, built from ruins and determination. Fall harvest was better than expected. They sold surplus in town, used the profits to fund the school project. By October, they'd purchased land and hired a teacher from back east, a young woman named Catherine, who'd read about Montana Territory and decided adventure was better than safety. The school opened in November, 10 students from surrounding homesteads, Caleb and Jonah among them. Alara stood watching on opening day, saw her boys walk into a building that represented hope and future and all the things Crow had tried to destroy. Felt something loosen in her chest, some final piece of trauma letting go. "You did this," Ronan said beside her. "None of this happens without you. We did this, all of us. Can't build anything alone out here. Maybe, but you started it. You stood up when standing up looked like suicide. That gave everyone else permission to hope. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. That's what brave is. Doing the thing even when you're terrified. Anyone can be brave when they're not scared." In December, almost 2 years after Thomas's death, Ronan asked her formally to marry him. Not with flowers or grand gestures, just a quiet question by the fire while the boys slept. She said yes, without hesitation, without reservation. They set the date for spring, when the land was green and everything felt possible. The wedding was small, just close friends and neighbors. Margaret Carlson cried through the whole ceremony. Eric gave Alara away, standing in for the father she'd left behind in Boston. Caleb and Jonah stood as witnesses, solemn and proud in their new clothes. It wasn't fancy, wasn't anything like her first wedding, but it was real, built on understanding rather than dreams, on partnership rather than romance. "I promise to keep trying," Ronan said during his vows, "to be better tomorrow than I am today, to protect your boys like they're mine, to build something with you that matters." "I promise the same," Alara replied, "to keep fighting for this family, this land, this life, to not let the past define our future, to choose hope, even when hope seems stupid." They kissed and everyone cheered, and for that moment everything was perfect. Not in the fairy tale sense, not without complications or scars, but perfect in the way real things were perfect, flawed and human and genuine. Afterward, during the celebration, Caleb pulled Alara aside. He was 11 now, nearly grown, his father's features settling into his face. "Are you happy, Mama?" he asked. "Yes, I think I am. Good. You deserve to be happy." He paused. "I miss Daddy. I'll always miss him. But Mr. Ronan, I mean, he's good to us. He makes you smile. That's enough." "You sure? I know this is complicated. Everything's complicated, but we're still here, still together. That's what matters, right? That we survived?" She pulled him close, this child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd seen too much but somehow remained kind. Yeah, baby, that's what matters. The years that followed weren't easy. Frontier life never was. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick livestock, and failed crops. Ronan's leg bothered him more as he aged, some days barely functional. Alara still had nightmares, still carried scars visible and invisible. The boys grew into young men with their own struggles, their own demons inherited from those terrible months. But they survived. More than survived, they thrived. The homestead expanded, became profitable. The school grew, added grades and teachers. Other families moved into the valley, drawn by stories of community and justice served. The land that Crow had tried to control through fear became a place defined by cooperation and mutual support. 15 years after Thomas's death, Alara stood on her porch watching grandchildren play in the meadow. Caleb had married a teacher from the school, had 3 kids already. Jonah was courting a rancher's daughter, talking about building his own place on the north section. The original cabin had been expanded 3 times, was barely recognizable as the desperate shelter she'd defended with rifle and terror. Ronan found her there, moving slower now, but still solid, still present. They'd built a life together without ever forgetting what it cost, who they'd lost along the way. "What are you thinking?" he asked. That Thomas would barely recognize this place, barely recognize me. "You think he'd be disappointed?" She considered that. "No, I think he'd understand. He knew the frontier demanded everything, knew that survival meant transformation. I'm not the woman he married, but I'm not sure that woman would have made it this far." "You're stronger now." "Harder, maybe. Not sure that's the same as stronger." "It is out here. Soft things don't last." She thought about that, about all the soft parts of herself she'd lost or buried to survive. The innocence, the idealism, the belief that right and wrong were clearly defined. She'd learned that morality was situational, that sometimes good people did terrible things for necessary reasons, that justice was complicated and revenge was empty. But she'd also learned that community mattered, that standing up to evil cost everything but was worth it, that love came in different forms and all of them were valid. That trauma didn't have to define you, that you could carry ghosts without becoming one yourself. "Do you have regrets?" she asked Ronan. "Every day, but also none. That's the thing about hard choices. They're hard because both options have costs. You just have to decide which costs you can live with. And you can live with this? Us? This life? Everything it took to build it?" "Yeah, I can live with this." He smiled, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Can you?" She looked out at the land Thomas had claimed and she'd defended, and they'd all transformed together. At the school teaching children who wouldn't exist without the choices she'd made. At her boys, grown and happy, building their own futures. At the scars on her hands from work and violence, evidence of survival. "Yeah," she said, "I can live with this." And she meant it. Not because everything was perfect or the past was forgotten or the ghosts were gone, but because she'd learned the fundamental truth of the frontier, the lesson Thomas had tried to teach, and she'd learned through blood and fire. You didn't survive by being strong. You survived by being stubborn, by refusing to quit when quitting looked rational, by standing up when staying down was safer, by choosing tomorrow even when today was impossible. The frontier broke everyone eventually, but sometimes, if you were lucky or stubborn or both, it broke you into something stronger than you'd been before. Into someone who could build from ruins, who could carry loss without drowning in it, who could find hope in unlikely places. Alara Vance had been a widow trying to survive when Crow came calling. Now she was a matriarch, a landowner, a fighter who'd changed her corner of Montana territory through sheer force of will and refusal to surrender. She hadn't just survived the frontier, she'd claimed it. And in claiming it, she'd become exactly what it demanded: unbreakable, unmovable, unwilling to let anyone take from her what she'd earned through blood. The last light of the day painted the mountains gold, the same view Thomas had loved. She could almost see him standing there, approving or disapproving. It didn't matter which. He'd given her the beginning of this story. She'd written the middle through violence and determination. And now the ending was hers to decide, not tragedy, not cautionary tale, but something harder and more honest. A story about what it took to survive when survival seemed impossible. About the price of standing up and whether that price was worth it. About how trauma changed you and whether that change was damage or growth or both at once. about a woman who'd lost everything and built something new from the ashes, who'd learned that strength wasn't about being fearless, but about being terrified and moving forward anyway. The sun set. The children kept playing. Ronan stood beside her, solid and real. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Imperfect, scarred, earned, real. And that was enough.